Hi everyone, welcome to this week's lecture on posing. This week we're going to be talking about how to design interesting poses for animation or interesting poses for concept design. Some of the best animators that I know are fantastic at designing poses. Their animation is beautiful, but one of the things that stands out that makes them better than other animators is the way that they've constructed their poses, the choices that they've made for designing that pose, how that pose tells a story, what the character might be feeling or thinking, what the character is doing. These are all things that we need to take into consideration whenever we're doing animation. And I'm going to show you some of the tips and tricks for how to design an interesting pose. So for this assignment, we need to hand in 5 rendered poses, just still images like this, and any sketches or designs that you might have drawn yourself, you would hand those in. Also reference images, any photos that you've gone and collected. Let's say that it's a character jumping or a character dancing. Collect as many images as possible and sift through them and try to take ideas from all of these different poses, so from all these different images, so that it helps you construct a really appealing, interesting pose. So for this assignment we're going to be using the version 3 Max Rig, which you can find on the Y Drive. It's also on LMS, so you can just download it from the front page of LMS on GAD 241. You'll see there that there is a Max Rig. So the things that you'll be marked on are how original is your idea and have you explored different options. Some people will just open up the Max Rig, they'll pose it out once, and then they'll just render it out and they'll hand that in. And that's not what we want. We want you to really try to explore the different options that will catch the essence of what the character is doing. And we'll talk more about that later on in this lecture. The quality of your work is very important. The way that you have staged your idea, have you framed it correctly? How's the lighting? And is the idea clearly illustrated? That means if I look at the pose, can I understand exactly what's happening? And how appealing is the quality of the image overall? Have you shown an understanding of rhythm and harmony in the pose? Is there a clear silhouette? Have you explored tilts, the way that the hips and the shoulders are tilted? Thinking of negative space as well as overall shape of the form. These we'll also talk about later on. So as far as your preparation, have you done any planning? What are the notes that you've taken down? Are there any sketches, any drawings that you've done? Hand all of those in as well. Put them in a separate folder and then submit them as well. And make sure that you've correctly labeled your assignment. Make sure that it's got your name and it's got your student number. There is a video tutorial that's posted at the bottom of this lecture that shows you how to correctly label your files as well as zip the files so that it's ready. I don't want any RAR files. If you could, please make sure that they're zip files. That would be fantastic. It's a problem for me to open RAR files. Also, the 5 images, they should be rendered out at high res. They're just single images. There's not animation, just a still frame. And so they should be 1280 pixels by 720 pixels. That would be great. And for each of those poses that you've designed, you also have to submit the 3ds Max files as well. And make sure that they're appropriately labeled so that I know what they correspond to. And then you can submit all of these via LMS. Okay, so this is due in week 9, the Saturday of week 9 at 6 p.m. So just check on the unit guide for this year to make sure what the date is. But anyway, it's normally week 9 on the Saturday. Now, part 2 of this is a 1500 word essay, and it should be titled "Creating a Narrative Through Posing." Now, I want you to talk about the following in the essay. I want you to discuss silhouettes, action lines, simple versus complex, tilts, the attitude and emotion that is in the pose, the personality that is being portrayed, as well as the narrative. What is the story behind the pose there, or in the image that you're submitting, or the image that you're researching? Because you're going to need to research two famous artists who personify great posing and help tell an interesting narrative. Now your artists, they can be traditional artists, they can be famous painters, but they can also be comic artists or sculptors, or they can even be famous animators. There's a lot of animators that out there, and they have fantastic blogs. They show their reference images, their planning. I'm going to show you a couple of my favorite artists who use a lot of planning, a lot of photo reference before they start doing their work. And this is important. You need to show as much of the planning that the other artists have done, as much of that as possible. If you can't find an artist who uses a lot of photo reference, or who has published a lot of planning sketches or thumbnail images, then you're more than welcome to use some of the references that I use in this lecture here. But it's important that you really do your homework and try to find as much about the artist as possible and their techniques for how they've researched these poses and designed their work. And then what I want you to do is compare and contrast the famous artist's work, what you've learned from what they've done with their poses, and how you've implemented some of their ideas or their techniques in your posing. So talk specifically about at least two of your own poses and the methods that you utilize to help create the narrative. So an example might be, you know, what would you determine the personality of the character to be? And, you know, if the character is feeling sad or if they're feeling happy, how is that demonstrated in the pose? You know, you might find the final painting a lot different from the reference image that they may have shown, and discuss, you know, what changes were made, and do you feel that these changes were successful? Did it help the pose in any way? But remember to always come back to the narrative. You know, is the pose successful, and does it help tell a story or sell an idea? Okay. So one of the first things that I want to talk about is this line of action. Now, for those of you who have done the drawing unit, you've seen this before. This is Preston Blair. So what a line of action is it's a construction line. And often in animation, it's the first line that we draw. It kind of shows the energy of the pose. And here you can see that there are quite often these nice curves. The more curve that you actually have, the more energy there is in these poses. You can see here how fantastic, you know, this curve here is so bent back. The other thing to remember with these action lines, these line of actions, is that all the body parts, or as many of the body parts, will try to flow or follow that action line. So if we come back up to Tom up the top here where he's punching, you can see here that we've drawn this nice action line, and you can see that the body, the hips, the chest, the neck, the head, the arm, and the hand all flow through that line, and it all comes down out through this knee at this point here. And that's one of the things that we want to try to design with our poses. It gives it a sense of rhythm or a sense of flow. Everything feels like it's connected in a way, and that there's a sense of energy. Now when you deviate from something like this simple line of action, you can see over here where we've got this kind of, you know, wiggly line, you know, the body parts kind of follow this, but what it's doing is it's just too busy. We've got a lot going on. You know, when you have a look at this image versus this image, you can see how clear this one here reads. So why is that? Why does this one read better than this one over here? Well, one of the reasons that this one works better is that our eye can easily follow this line. we don't have to scan. With this one here, we have to scan. We have to keep on traversing backwards and forwards to kind of figure out what's going on. And eventually you can make up the picture. You do understand that, you know, this cat is punching this other character over here. But it takes a little bit of time because you have to take in all of this detail. And what we're doing by allowing, or by putting all of these different components, different body parts on this line, is that we're helping the viewer's eye kind of flow through the image. And by doing this, we create an appealing image. Once again, if you have a look at this over here, Tom with the bat, the same idea. We draw this action line first, and all of the parts, all the different body parts, they flow through that line, whereas with this one, it's all over the place. And the same with this one as well. Now, you'll notice that with these ones here, they're just C-shaped curves, but quite often you can actually get nice S-shaped curves if you want to. But the point is that it should all feel like there's a flow. You know, here's another S-shaped one with Tom running, but once again, you know, the artist is thinking in terms of, well, this arm is flowing through the body, flowing through the head, down through the body, and out through the tail. Okay. And even when your character is standing straight up and down, if you can just add a little bit of a curve to the action line, it will just make it a lot more interesting. Okay, you don't want anything which is just straight up and down. That's very boring, but just giving it a little bit of a curve can make the image appealing. And we can take this one step further. We can actually use this idea with two or more characters, and with the way that we design our composition. So with this image here, you can see that we've got our action line which is flowing all the way through the head. The head is tilted back, through the neck, through the chest, and then through these arms, through the rope, and then it comes all the way down through the horse's head, and you just get this nice sense of flow and connection between, and it just reads a lot better than if all of the body parts were all over the place. Okay. Now the next thing that we need to talk about are silhouettes, and this image here clearly illustrates it. It's about how you can sell the pose in a very clear way. Now the idea is that the duck is pulling a rabbit out of a hat, and you can see here we've got the duck pulling the rabbit out of the hat, and the same over here. But in silhouette, one of these reads a lot better than the other one. You can see here that we don't really understand what the story is, so the staging of the idea isn't as well crafted as what we have over here, with the duck side on, and with a lot of negative space in between the rabbit and the duck. You know, the way that the hand has been posed, the ears, the silhouette of the rabbit, it's clear of exactly what the idea is, or what's going on in the story. And quite often, the trick with a good silhouette is that you would stage everything off to the side, rather than having your objects in front of the body. So that also means your hands. Wherever possible, if you can make sure that your hands, the hand poses, are just away from the center of the body, so that they're kind of out to the side here, that's going to be a lot more interesting than if the hands are in front of the body, because in silhouette we just don't know what's going on. But that's not true all the time. Sometimes what you can do is you can still have the hands in front of the body, but quite often what we would use is contrast. So maybe the hands will be nice bright colors, and then maybe behind the hands it's a dark shirt or something, and the contrast between those two will help sell what the hands are doing. And here's another great silhouette. You can clearly see what these two people are doing. They're dancing. You've got this fantastic energy line, this line of action which comes all the way through here, through her leg. The body is is bent back, you know, comes through the neck and the head, but it also comes up through this through the man's head as well. You can see here that all of the feet have their own negative space. So in silhouette, you know, it reads brilliantly. The heel is off the ground here, which is fantastic, and this is a very important part of the image. So it has its own space. If this foot here was doubled up over in this area over here, if this was positioned right over here, we wouldn't be able to see this, and you can see that it just adds a nice layer of detail or layer of information here. Here's another strong pose, just of someone standing. Once again, with that line of action, you get a read of just this one arm here. We don't need to see the other one, and we'll talk a little bit more about why we don't need to see the other one later on in this lecture. But it's an interesting pose, and you get a sense of who this character is, what she's feeling. The hand is clenched there, the head is down, but it's a very strong pose. And the same with this silhouette here. Once again, the guitar has its own negative space. There's nothing around it. You can see his hand is holding the guitar, but once again we have this fantastic line of action and exaggerating that so that it really feels energetic. And so when we're designing our poses, we often want to think in terms of silhouette. So even when we have a very simple character like the Max rig, for example, we need there to be this line of action, and for all of these different components of the body or any props that they're holding to have their own negative space. Now, one of my favorite artists is Glen Keane. He's an animator from Disney. He's worked on a number of fantastic films. He's directed some beautiful movies, and you recognize his work. But these are just some of his sketches that he does in his own spare time. But once again, if you look at this piece, the attitude in the pose is beautiful. The way that he's made this conscious decision about how the hand is going to be positioned behind the back, being able to see this elbow here, the way that this elbow kind of flows through into this elbow here, makes this nice shape. We've got the action line which runs all the way down through the body and down out through the heel, which is great. But the thing which I love about this pose is that the pose is in motion, but not drastically so. It's not over the top, and it's the attitude in the hands. It's very simple, but it's just incredibly powerful. And also, when we're designing our poses, we should try to make sure that they're asymmetrical, meaning that you don't want whatever's happening on one side to be happening on the other side. So you always want to mix it up wherever possible. Make sure that the legs aren't doing exactly the same thing, and make sure that the hands aren't doing exactly the same thing, because if they are, then quite often it's a boring pose. It's not as appealing, and you haven't really explored the choices or explored your options for the pose. Now, Animation Mentor, for any animators that are keen on taking their animation education even further, this is a great online school. It's probably about $20,000 for 1.5 years, but this is an exercise that they do as well. In fact, most animation schools do the same exercise. But what the students do here is that they really try to find as many interesting poses as possible, and then they select their favorites. So here you can see here's a range of different poses, but have a look at this one. I love this one, and obviously so does the artist, because it looks like that's the one that they've selected. But we've got this action line which is running through the body here, and then also the artist has been very careful to make sure that he's posing this knee so that it flows through this thigh and then out through the top of this other knee here, and that's incredible. Quite often when people would pose something like this, they would just have maybe both knees up in the air. But what he's done is he's forced the knee down so that he's trying to think of a way of continuing this line of action through this leg and out through this leg here. So if he had his other knee up like this, then it's going to break that line of action. But here you can see, just by dropping the knee down, he's created this energy which flows on through the legs. And also in silhouette, just being able to see the hands, the way that the knuckles are holding onto the head, the fingers are holding onto the head, you really get a sense of anguish. It's such a powerful image. Then the way that this elbow here isn't intersecting the backside here, it has its own negative space in between that area there, so that as a silhouette it reads beautifully. And here's another couple of explorations. You can see here once again the artist is also thinking, you can see with all of these he's really trying to think in terms of line of action as well as energy. You know, you get a sense of how powerful this pose here is. This guy is holding up something, but once again, you know, exaggerating this pose, making sure that, you know, everything kind of flows through that line of action. Now, when you're planning out your poses, you could just do them with stick figures. That's completely fine. But you should base it from a photo image. I would highly recommend that you go out and you find reference first, because without the reference, you're going to find this quite difficult to do. And so you can see here's some stick figures, but then, you know, with the one that he likes, he's just gone in and he's added a layer of detail. You don't need to go, you know, this far into detail. But one of the things that I just wanted to draw your attention to is you can see here how he's done these red lines, and then we're going to be talking about this later on. These are your tilts. So we've got this nice sense of rhythm, sense of harmony, rhythm that flows through here and then out through here. It feels like, you know, these points all kind of converge over here, and it all kind of fans out from this point here. But the tilts are important, so we'll talk about that later. Okay, so I'll stop this one now and we'll do part 2 right after this.